Everyone so much for joining. My name is Anna McLaughlin. I'm the founder of Sci-Translate and the Sci-Translate community, which brings together scientists, clinicians, creatives, and industry experts interested in mental health and behavioral science. Um, so what I'll do is I'll start off with a quick overview of today's session. So it's going to be a very relaxed, interactive format. We have three key themes, which we have developed based on questions from the audience. And each of the speakers is going to respond to these themes. And you're welcome to pop any questions that you have in the chat at any time, but we're going to have the audience discussion right at the end. At the end, if you want to ask a question, we can unmute you, or we'll work through the questions in the chat. You're welcome to talk, or you can listen in. Either way, it's fine. And without further ado, I will start introducing all the speakers that we have here today. So first of all, we have Dr. Catherine Bates joining us. She's a research fellow and co-investigator at King's College London. She's also the founder of the Science or Fiction podcast. Next up, we have Dr. Clementine Edwards. She's a Wellcome Early Career Award Fellow and Research Clinical Psychologist at King's College London as well. She's also leading the Anhedonia project, which is a really interesting research project that I'd recommend everyone has a look at. We also have Chris Frederick, who's founder of Project Soulstride and an independent lived experience advisor. It's a really fantastic citizen-led platform, and Chris is doing some amazing work there. So I'd also recommend that everyone checks that out. Next up, we have Dr. Georgie Gnan. She's the co-founder of Uni, a mixed methods researcher and consultant. So Georgie has recently co-founded Uni, which is a startup for informal carers. Next, we have Tara Sayek and Celia Berry. She's a clinical psychologist and global mental health specialist at the University of Zimbabwe, and also she works at African Youth in Mind. And finally, we have Jane Fusaya. She's a research assistant at the University of Zimbabwe, and she also brings her professional and lived experience to this topic. So really great panel of speakers here. And without further ado, we'll get started on the first theme because we have a lot to cover today. So our first theme, which was based on audience questions, is exploring what lived experience looks like across different contexts. We have a lot of speakers here from different backgrounds, different industries. So each of them will share a little bit about what lived experience looks like in practice in their context today. So we'll go over to you first, Terry.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's raining here, so there might be a bit of a noise. So meaningful involvement in academia for lived experience means that we are starting to think about different research questions with people with lived experience. So we've been, as researchers and academic professionals, we've been trained to come up with interventions, to ask questions, and, to come up with answers through research. But we usually don't involve the people that we're trying to serve, the people we're trying to come up with interventions for. So for me, it means that, asking questions from the beginning, involving those who've gone through the lived experience of different mental health conditions. So conceptualization needs to involve lived experience. Needs assessment, we can't do a needs assessment if we don't understand what the needs are. And, the best people to be able to tell us what the needs are would be those who've had a lived experience of the different interventions that we want to come up with. And as well as, involving those with lived experiences, researchers, not just as participants and people we ask questions and then leave. So it's going from the concept up to, doing the research. If it's an RCT, it means involving those with lived experience as researchers, not just as participants. So that's what lived experience means to me in academia.
Thanks, Terry. And now I think we'll go over to Jane. As you work with Terry, I think this is a great chance for you to share what your perspective is.
Evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'd like to say I think she did touch on a lot of the key points, which is the involvement of lived experiences in the conception of whatever interventions we're trying to come up with. So I think it's about co-creation rather than just like ticking a box to say we've involved young people who struggle with depression and anxiety, but actually having them at the forefront, listening to what our voices are, what it is that we actually need. So I think having programs as well that allow for co-production, I would say like for example, the program we've been working on, that is under Mrs. Bear's PhD, which is Out of the Shadows, where it's a podcast set up where we actually have young people and it's a podcast for young people by young people. And we have a discussion about what are our thoughts around depression, around anxiety, what is it that we actually think we need, not just having the professionals come and tell us what they think we need. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Jane. I think that actually really leads really well into your work, Catherine, with the podcast as well, although you take a slightly different approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just to echo that, we tried to also, well, yeah, we're also for young people, by young people as well. And I think in that context, like lived experience involvement looks like high ownership. So by paying, yeah, our lived experience experts are often young people, by to paying them in roles and also training them as podcast producers, training them as content creators, they have a high level of ownership over what is produced. So rather than like as academics producing science communication content that we think is accessible, they're producing what they want to know about, like the issues that most affect them. So I think that's what lived experience involvement looks like. I think also for me, it's about being flexible. So we have to be super flexible to people's needs, being involved in the project, and also really flexible depending on the project. So it's definitely not a like one size fits all, or there's like one type of model of lived experience involvement. I think we have to be adjusting all the time.
Yeah, definitely. That's really important. So now we're going to pivot a little bit and go to Georgie, who's working more in the startup world and industry. So, Georgie, from your perspective, what does lived experience look like over there?
Thanks, and hi everyone. I suppose so far most of my experience is actually within academia in kind of lived experience involvement, because I am actually really new to the startup world. And I think, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of really similar things that you have to work on. And I've been working closely with Chris to kind of come up with our outline for what we want to do with our lived experience advisory group. And one of the things that I think kind of relates to the flexibility that Catherine talked about is being open to listening. I feel like often we make kind of assumptions of what we think people might want out of your kind of research or out of your lived experience group. And I'm really learning that sometimes, yeah, just being really open-minded. So it helps to have an idea of what you want to go through, but actually that flexibility is related to really listening to people who I suppose, especially in the startup world, are going to be the people using your product. So I suppose also in academic research will be the people who could benefit from your findings. So I think, yeah, I would think about listening and also about just kind of being transparent. So I think one of the things that's really difficult is obviously people understand from like a theoretical standpoint how you'd want to do things and what would be helpful, but often those are just not possible because of constraints of budgets or timelines. And I think rather than over promising, I feel like at the moment for us that has been speaking to people, building those relationships, but not actually starting the work because the budget just isn't there. And I think that is about, yeah, all about transparency as well.
Thank you so much, Georgie. And Chris, based on your experience working with organizations like Georgie's, or I know you work with a lot of different kinds of organizations, what kind of forms
Yeah,
of involvement have you seen?
lots of different organisations, large and small. Firstly, Catherine, if you're doing that science fiction podcast, I need to be on that. I need to talk about all things Star Wars, if that's possible. Um, I've been in this area now for only 3 years, and I think, and now if I look at my impact log, I've probably been involved in over 45 different projects in that time. Um, and what I'm pleased about is that, when I started, I was terrified. Terrified for one simple reason. I left school with no qualifications. So suddenly being put into spaces where I'm having to engage with doctors like yourselves and all these fancy titles and acronyms scared the living daylights out of me. And even as a mature business person, I lacked a lot of confidence, and that meant that I was unable to contribute in the same way that I am now. And I think what's helped is the ability to articulate stories. We've had, as LXPs or EBEs or whatever we call ourselves, we've had to coach researchers on the importance of stories and where they fit into their overall thinking. Um, that for me has been a bridge that I've been able to sort of traverse from an outsider into an insider. The second thing is, and going back to those acronyms, I mean, if I think about all the terms of reference and the information that I've been sent over the years, trying to scan through this stuff, a lot of it just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand it. So again, one of the things that I've seen slowly is that some researchers are beginning to use their own ability to translate those complex issues, those complex questions or tasks or whatever the study is into lay language. That is essential if you're to build a sustainable partnership with any LXP. And lastly is I'm beginning to see partnerships. We talk about transactional, we talk about relationships. For me, it only comes down to one word. That's building partnerships. Partnerships that go in and out of studies. If you've got a partnership with a group of individuals, nurture those partnerships because you never know when you're going to need to tap on their expertise or indeed leverage them or refer them to associates or colleagues of yours that may also benefit from their expertise. So I think overall, as a movement, I call it a movement, it is heading in the right direction. But as I'll come on to later, there's still a long way to go.
Thank you so much, Chris. Um, and just to make a quick note, we're having a little bit of trouble with the spotlight. It's not going to different speakers as planned, so we're trying to fix that behind the scenes. But just to say, it's not meant to be all me the whole duration of this meeting. Um, but over to you now, Clem. I'd love to hear what lived experience looks like in your context, and particularly with the Anhedonia project, because that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Thanks, everybody. Really interesting thoughts so far. I've been trying to think about what I can add that hasn't already been said, and I think what comes to mind is perhaps a little bit of insight into how I've built the lived experience input into the Anhedonia project. And I guess practically that means I have a lived experience advisory panel, and some of those members reviewed the fellowship application a long time before it started. But I also advertised through lived experience groups and movements online for anyone with experience of anhedonia. And I tried to keep the criteria or the kind of, yeah, the kind of people I was looking for, as brief as description as possible to try and reach as many people as possible. And yeah, and I was absolutely flooded. I had over 50 or 60 people email me within a couple of weeks, which I found very overwhelming. It's my first project that I'm leading. So I was I think that to me that reflects just how much that people want to be involved in shaping the research that is all about their experiences, and that makes, obviously. But yeah, that was a really tough moment. We talk about tensions and things later, but I just wanted to share that because I think sometimes people say to me, I can't find anyone, and I find that I wanted to say it's really people are keen to get involved. And yeah, and I built the lived experience panel from that initial process. And then I also have small working groups around particular aspects of the project. So if one of the lived experience panel members is particularly interested in the website or a particular aspect of the study, like virtual reality or the smartphone apps, then they can get involved in a more detailed way in those components. And then also I trained the people who are interested in qualitative interview skills, and they conducted the qualitative interviews and focus groups that were the first part of the project with me or one of my team as co-facilitators. And that was so powerful. And I don't think I'll ever do qualitative research any other way going forwards. It was such a privilege to be in those conversations and witness that shared experience of the two people kind of building in that room. And yeah, so there are some ways that people have been involved. I guess my other reflection would be that I've really learned that lived experience should be in all spaces of a research project, that there's no meeting that should be off limits, and if it's not accessible, then you need to make it accessible, because the project is always improved when there's lived experience voices in those spaces. And I think I've working on it always, but I'm the things that have helped me are exactly like Chris said, building partnerships and working relationships with the panel members. And that's something that as a clinician, they're kind of in a role that it has some inherent vulnerability, and we're trained to have boundaries, and I needed to learn that actually I shouldn't have those boundaries. These are colleagues, they're kind of partners in the project, and so I share lots, just like I do with other colleagues. I share bits of my personal life, they tell me about theirs. And I know, we've been through tough times and good times in the whole team, as every team does, and we all kind of share that. But that's been a journey I've been on, and I'm still learning all the time, particularly from them, about how to do it well. Yeah, and then appropriate recognition and reimbursement. So the lived experience panel members that have supported projects have been co-authors on the manuscripts that have been submitted for publication. They're recognised on the website in the way that they wanted to be, and they shaped that completely. And I am costed in the fellowship the appropriate reimbursement and following the NIHR involved guidelines for any time that they spend on the project, just like I'm paid for my time. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Clem. And I think that's actually something that I haven't seen come up very much before, is how people can choose to be involved. And I think giving them that autonomy based on what they enjoy or what their strengths are is really important when it becomes to just involving anyone in a project. So yeah, that's great to hear. And lots of important points that I think we'll cover in more detail through the next themes. But just to also pick up on what you said, is we're all learning, we're all figuring it out. And that's why we're having this discussion today, to figure out how we can do it better. So that's a really good aim to carry as we go through this session. Okay, moving on to the second theme. Where does lived experience involvement fall short in practice? So I think it's also helpful to talk about some of the common challenges that come up, because it's true, we all make mistakes, we all underestimate things, and the best way to overcome them is by sharing them and figuring out, okay, how can we avoid that in future? So first of all, I'd love to go over to Chris to talk about your experience in this area and what you've seen.
Well, I'd firstly want to congratulate Clem, because the way she just described her project there, for me, I'm jealous. It's like gold standard. If everybody sort of did what she did, I think those of us on this side of the fence, we'd all be very happy. But unfortunately, it's not quite the case. Um, I'm looking at this panel today, and I tell you what I see. I see one guy. And that is just a classic example of so many spaces that I'm in where there are just too few men. So the first thing is, for all of you academics out there, I don't know, just try and recruit more guys, particularly in the suicide prevention, loneliness, mental health space. We're awful at talking about this stuff, but I tell you what, when you crack that nut, you're gonna find some real gold in there. But you just got to be persistent. And then obviously, as a black man, then there's even less of us working in this space. So that minoritized that issue that I certainly faced, I felt really isolated. It became a very isolating and lonely space to occupy. So one of the missions I'm on is to talk about the work I do and just trying to encourage other black men to come out of the shadows and talk about this stuff, just trying to get involved. But it's getting better, but it's taking, for me, it's taken a little bit too long. Um, there are three things I want to just quickly run by you guys, and that's I think about these three things. I think about input versus impact. We're good at gathering input, right? There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of input out there, but we're far less clear on how that actually impacts decisions. We don't know. Um, I was sent a research report earlier this week, 214 pages, and a thank you message from the researcher to the LXP group. Uh, there's no way I'm going to read 214 pages. What I didn't see was a lay abstract at the beginning of that document, 2 pages. Just tell me just tell me what the summary is. And then I looked through the contents pages, which are 2 contents pages, did not see the terminology lived experience participation mentioned once. If I don't see it in the contents page, I'm certainly not going to scan through a 50-page document, let alone a 200+ page document. So again, please help us to help you. Make it interesting. Give us something to, to hold on to, because we need to be inspired. We value our time, and we're talking about some really difficult issues. And for you to expect that from us, you've got to work, you've got to give us more. You've got to show us more, right? So that's why I come back to this partnership. I spent 28 years in the recruitment industry. So for me, it was all about pipeline building. I kind of had an idea of the market I was in, the sectors I wanted to focus on. So even if I didn't have vacancies, I'd be building proactive pipelines. I'd be nurturing those candidates 1 or 2 years in advance. So that the moment I got that opportunity, I could present my shortlist within a week as opposed to 3 months. Now I use that simple private sector, that international private sector experience, and say, okay, we are expected as LXP, where we're recruited, we're expected to drop in, we're expected to turn up. But when you don't need us, we get dropped. We don't hear from you. So rather than that happening, nurture those relationships with us. Simple things. Find out when our birthday is. We don't want a present from you, but just an email to say, hey, I remember it's your birthday. Happy birthday. Just so that we know we're in your mind. Yeah, get to know us as people. I talk about my passion of Star Wars to everybody, but I also want people to say, hey, I've just saw The Mandalorian last week and I was thinking of you, Chris. That for me is building some kind of relationship. Tells me the person's interested in who I am as a human being before an LXP. Yeah. And then lastly, we lack structure and support. What I knew back then, 3 years ago, to what I know now, it's light years, right? But if I was to identify and mentor half a dozen black men, I I, I want to be able to show them what structure, what support could look like if they do the work that I do. But unfortunately, in the research space, all too often, those controlling those research studies don't provide us with that structure, that platform. And essentially, you're not setting us up to succeed. You're setting us up to fail. Now, we'll still show up, even though we know we're going to fail. That's the sad truth. But build us up to succeed so we can come back. We want to work with you. We want others to work with you as well. Yeah. Those are the three themes. Yeah.
That's amazing, Chris. That's a really helpful roadmap. And I think it's so important not to for academics or researchers to present things in the way that they would expect them to advisors, because yeah, like you said, giving someone a 200-page word report just isn't in the format that anyone can digest that easily. So yeah, actually, Catherine, I would love to hear what you think about this area as a science communicator and making information accessible to people, um, and how to, yeah, make that easier for advisors. or just anyone involved in the project?
Yeah, that's a big question. Um, I think I just also want to echo something that Chris said about how it one of the issues is that it's often unclear how like lived experience input has led to impact or like the role it's had in like a research output, and that can be something that we have to do better. It's like a we need better like feedback loops even of like this is the input that you gave us and this is how we've implemented it. This is how we've, these bits we haven't been able to do because of XYZ reason. But it then goes back to what Chris said again about like building partnerships. Maybe that's one way that we can do that. Um, and then yeah, I think it's about that. What was the other part of your question in terms of like how we can move forward?
It was just about science communication and communication with lived experience advisors, getting them involved in a way that is accessible and
Yeah.
not dumping all the information and responsibility on them to figure out how to go about being involved.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so a few different ways that we do it is like we start with the issue. So instead of being like, here's a load of research that we need to do in order to make an episode about like chatbots are making us lonely, it's more like what issues matter to you and how do you want us to cover them? Have you seen this news article about how people using AI chatbots are making people lonely? And what do you think about it? Is this important to you? So then when you lead with the issue, the communication comes a bit more organically. So some young people I work with, they just want to be behind the scenes. They want to produce podcast episodes. They want to do like some of the research, but then some people want to like co-host episodes or they want to make social media content. So it's coming back into that flexibility again. I think like sometimes we can science communication, we can feel like it's one thing, but it's so many different things and has so many different levels. Um, from literally doing research to feed into a piece of content to being the person that's talking on the camera talking about the content like this it's really varied. So I guess a few things like flexibility, leading with the person's needs or leading with the what the issue might be so that we can cover it properly instead of like me being like I want us to write this 5-page article on whatever. It's starting with the problem, I guess, that we're trying to solve or trying to explain.
I love that. So yeah, really getting to the core of the issue and then working backwards from there. Um, Great. I'll go over to Jade now. I'd be really curious to know what you've seen in your experience or what you think how lived experience involvement falls short.
I think Chris did touch on a lot of the important things, like for example, with the jargon, right? The intellectual jargon that's often used, especially in the research papers and research articles, where a lot of young people, we do want to get involved in these things, but not everyone obviously has the privilege of a literate background. So of course they get lost. A lot of things get lost in translation. So I think one of the good things that I've seen happening, especially with the work that I've been doing with Business Beta, is the cultural adaptation, right? Where we actually go into the communities, especially the peri-urban communities, when we're looking at issues, mental health issues like depression and anxiety, where those are the areas where depression and anxiety are almost the highest, right? Where some of the highest rates are. And actually going into those communities and speaking to other young people and hearing how they view depression, how they view anxiety, what is their understanding of it, right? So when we start there, it makes it a lot easier to kind of translate the jargon that we have in a way that they can also understand, and in a way that they can, if we were to release a manuscript, a paper, they can also kind of follow what's going on. When we use language like, for example, kutsongwane stress in Shona, which is what we understand anxiety to be, right? But if you were to go into the community and say, do you have anxiety? Most people wouldn't actually understand what you're saying. So it makes it difficult for lived experience to want to participate in these research projects. So I think, yeah, so I think the translation part is a really core element to having people get on board. And also, I would say, with the conception issue, having people actually conceptualize from the get-go is so important as well. Like with the podcast, right? Where it's not Mrs. Bear coming to tell us what to do, but it's us coming up with the ideas for what we want to discuss on the podcast. It's us hosting the podcast and having the discussions with each other and young people from different backgrounds as well. Because those power dynamics also do exist between like professionals, and especially when there's the age gap, right, with older people and young people. And in communities like mine in Zimbabwe, where we've been taught to respect our elders, if there's things we want to get off our chest, it's difficult to have that conversation with an older person and actually be honest and say, well, I'm sick of people just telling me to go to therapy because maybe that's not what I want, right? Maybe I actually just want there to be more peer-led spaces, right? But I can't really feel comfortable to say that in the presence of an elder. But then I feel more comfortable saying it around a group of my peers. So, yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, Jane. That was yeah, so many useful examples that you just gave there. Um, I won't touch on them now, but perhaps we can pick back up on them at the end. So I'll go over to Clem now, just to hear what you found in your practice or what you've seen come up.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what's been said. I think the accessibility thing is so important, and I would say, I would go even further to say not only if you don't make your work accessible to your lived experience panel members or consultants, then not only are you not allowing or enabling them to help you, but you're also, as actually for a lot of people quite a harmful experience. Like it's quite upsetting to receive something that you can't access and to be expected. Like I hate it when that happens to me. If someone sends me something very technical that I don't understand and I'm expected to go to a meeting and talk about it, that makes me very stressed. So I think I've definitely heard lots of stories of people being put off when they have received that sort of thing. And I think sometimes researchers think, oh, if they can't read it, then I'll talk to them about it, but I'll send it just so they've got it. And I think that's something we do a lot, perhaps just to, in general, with lots of things, we just send people stuff. But I think actually thinking through every communication is really important. And whilst to you it's just another someone else getting a copy of that protocol, to that person it's might be that only communication you send that month or that fortnight. And so actually the fact that it's a really long document they can't read is actually really negative. So yeah, I find that recording documents is really helpful. AI is not quite caught up, so you can't quite just put it in and get it out. But for the manuscripts that I've published with lived experience co-authors, they really struggle to find the document a kind of accessible way of commenting on it or providing an opinion. So we just voice recorded me reading out the manuscript into my computer on the record function, saved it and sent it, and then they could listen to it on their phone or on the computer or whatever worked for them, and that really allowed them to voice an opinion. And I felt that they had really heard what they were being named on, which I wasn't feeling very confident about with the written stuff. So yeah, I think accessibility and flexibility, like Catherine said, are two of the really the things that we do badly all the time. I think also there'll be a plan for a project. This is the lived experience involvement plan. And if someone doesn't fit into that, the researcher will plow on and try and find someone else. Oh, I've stopped hearing from that person, so I have to find someone else, rather than investing in that and trying to understand what that's all about. And I think that's something that comes from the pressure to deliver projects on time and plan and to budget, and the funders kind of having a box for it that feels quite prescriptive. So the other thing I would say that we often fall short on in academia anyway, and clinical settings, is letting go of our power and control over what's going to happen, and letting the lived experience involvement that you've invited in shape what you do. Like I've learned so much from just saying, what would you guys like to do about this, and being honest and saying, I don't know how to get your input into this thing because I find it really hard to understand it. It's really technical, but I don't want to avoid it, so what shall we do? And they'll always have a suggestion, always. And it's always way better than anything I thought of course, because it's about how they can access it. So yeah, I think I often see researchers very stressed about things, a plan they've made that the lived experience involvement isn't fitting into. And that makes me sad. I think that's not the way around it should be.
Thank you so much, Clem. I'll just go over to Georgie now. I want to make sure that we have enough time for the last theme, so I'll stop commenting on everything everyone says to leave more time for the actual speakers.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what everyone said. I think to add, I think one of the things that people find really hard is to truly involve people as part of the team and not end up making that kind of co-production or involvement quite tokenistic. And I think it's something that we've gotten wrong quite a few times on projects that I've worked on. And we actually developed a course with one of my teams to try and make sure that we could really include our lived experience advisors, who we actually brought on as peer researchers, to really, I guess, truly involve them as much as we could. We kind of did a course on all the aspects around research so that they could understand kind of, why it is that we might do interviews here and, collect surveys for other things, and to, I suppose, try and involve them as much as we could in being able to provide feedback in those ways. So it's kind of around, making that accessible. So I'm happy to share the link. I think you have to pay for it directly through, it's on FutureLearn, but we always were able to give free access. So if anybody was interested for peer researchers, I think I could make that happen as well. And I think just in addition, as like another challenge or attention that I think I've noticed and found incredibly frustrating is actually more around like practicalities. So something like payment has often gotten in the way, and for me, got in the way in a really kind of emotional way. So we had peer researchers working with us, and the payment system at the university was just so antiquated. It took like 3 months to get payments signed off, and people just weren't being paid for their time like in a timely fashion. And there was me getting my salary just every month, and we were trying to fight for the payments to come through, and I feel like that is just not okay. Saying you'll involve people, pay them for their time, and then those systems that are in place are actually often in the way. So that makes it sound like I'm blaming the system rather than us. But I think a lot of the time, your hands are tied with certain things as well. And I think that's a huge issue, because then how are you supposed to make people feel like they're part of the team? And, you kind of say, oh, we're respecting your input, and then you can't pay. And I think that's one of the biggest tensions, yeah, that I've experienced on several projects.
Thanks so much, Georgie. And I'll just go over to Terry now for the last comment on this theme before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, I think pretty much everything has been mentioned, but I think I was going to echo power dynamic. It's very difficult without us wanting to correct things and, make sure that the research that we're trying to do is what's coming out a bit more. So I think what we have done in SIEM to try and deal with that, to involve community engagement. So you're going back to the community and saying, you know what, this is what we're trying to do in research. What?
Sorry, Terry, I think we're just having connection issues with your audio. So do you just want to try turning your video off, and then we can try again? I think we may have cut out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think that's better.
Okay, all right. So I'll just switch off my video for now.
Unfortunately, I think we're still having connection issues with your audio. So what we'll do is we'll move on to the next theme for now, and hopefully it improves a little bit. Okay, so moving on to the last theme, and I realize we're running out of time now. So perhaps what we can do is we can combine this theme with audience questions as well, looking to how to improve things in the future. So we do have a few audience questions here. that you can take turns answering in your responses, and we can also take any questions from the audience in the chat, or if you have a really burning question that you'd like to ask during the call, just please raise your hand for the audience members and we can unmute you. So for this one, I will go back over to Georgie first.
Thank you. I feel like, yeah, my first thought around how I can improve lived experience is very much linked to my complaint, I think, about payments and the kind of practicalities of things. I think that one of the things that needs to improve is actually the kind of funding and general infrastructure. So I think there's a bit of a mismatch between what's kind of expected of you to do and then what you're able to do. So I feel like, you know, for most funding calls, you have to include lived experience, and it's something that, you know, people encourage you to kind of learn about, go to webinars about, and all sorts of things. And I feel like, Clem, what you described in your funding and the way you've done your project sounds incredible. But I do think that that's really rare. I think from a lot of what I've seen, you know, you're expected to include lived experience, but then the budget might not be big enough for some of the things that you think you'll be able to do, or the timeline is way too short and people expect that you'd be able to kind of onboard people and truly involve them with just kind of a couple of months or something. So I think that's actually the biggest area that needs improvement to truly be able to do the kind of work that you want to do. And I suppose that's kind of more from the academic side, but we're in a similar position in the startup world with, you know, pressure to move fast on one hand, and, you know, low budgets and things like that. So I think if that doesn't improve, then it is really difficult to do things, even if you kind of learn loads about how to do it right and you want to include people. So I think that would be, my biggest hope for improving things in the future.
Thanks so much, Georgie. Do you want to build on that, Clem? Seeing as Georgie referenced your brilliant approach.
Yeah, thanks, Georgie. I think that I agree. There is often not enough budget. There is often time limits. I think my recommendation to anyone working in mental health is to not build lived experience panels or advisors as part of your team for that project, but to build them for your career and your research program for the next 5, 10, 20, 30, whatever it is, years. And so you might not be able to pay them at times because you haven't, you know, we all know the research life cycle very grant based, very short term, but at least in between those times you can keep in touch with an email and just ask how they are every now and then. I'm sure they will want to know how you're doing, just the same way that I often have team members who I can't employ because I don't have a grant at the moment, but I know where they're working and would always get in touch if something came up. I guess I kind of think of it the same way. And then if there is a little pot of money in, and it's you just think this person would be perfect, so you really want to know what they think about this thing you're trying to do, then you can pay them for a one-off meeting. And it's not the stress of finding someone for a one-off meeting and a limited involvement and false promises and all the things we worry about. So I guess that would be one thing I would say, is that to view these as working relationships that you'll have for a really long time, and they'll wax and wane, and you might be in touch lots at one point and not at other points. But like lots of working relationships we have, we can manage that, and we're very good at that. And I think for lots of reasons, some understandable, some less so, lots to do with stigma and discrimination, lived experience. Consultants are othered. They're either seen as very vulnerable and needing protecting in lots of ways that actually just prevents them from being involved, or they're seen, I think people feel like the relationship is tricky. So I guess this would be my advice, is how to view the relationship. And I think that's probably my biggest tip for moving forwards. I think that the other thing is that came to mind, I haven't mentioned yet, is creativity. So I'm not creative at all. My lived experience panel are telling me I've been art shamed too much as a child, and that's inhibited my ability to express myself, which I'm fully on board with. But my lived experience of trying to do art is that I really hate it. But my lived experience panel are showing me that the way forwards with allowing them to tell me what anhedonia means to them and what solutions they want to see is to let them draw it, write a poem about it, find a song that expresses it for them. And so we have regular creative workshops where they're not paid to attend. So it's not doesn't have to have anything to do with the project. We don't review anything to do with it, but it's just an informal space where we come together and share what we're working on, or what we've seen that we like, or music, and that's really helped with that relationship building. And I think allowing space for people to express themselves in ways that aren't written emails or speaking in a meeting is so important. And that will differ. That's just one example. But I think that thing of letting go of thinking you know what's best for your lived experience involvement in your project and letting them tell you what's best is changed the whole way I do things. And that would be my other piece of advice.
Thank you so much, Clem. Yeah, those are really good points. And Chris, I saw you had some emojis going during Clem's talk. So did you want to build on what you think we should
Yeah,
improve in
listen,
the future? Or
I'm loving what Clem's talking about. I'm loving what Georgie's talking about. I reckon we should have had not an hour. This should have been an hour and a half session because I don't want to leave at 6. I think we've got way too much to talk about, honestly. Listen, the best thing I can do here is say to you folks that is it in this way. Um, from the beginning of this year, I made a conscious decision that every new engagement, once I submitted my expression of interest and I had a call with the researchers, I would go into every call asking them this one question. Where in your process do you actually capture and evidence the impact of lived experience? Now, you would be shocked at how many researchers I've asked that question to who are totally dumbfounded. They're not expecting the question from a lived experience practitioner. They don't know how to answer that question. Now, as somebody who was formerly in business development and recruitment, we respond to your recruitment ad for a research study, but it's not just you interviewing us. We are also interviewing you because there are so many studies going on now and so much choice. So please do not be under the illusion that even though we've sent an EOI, we are more than 50% interested. If we are not getting any level of detail or insight from that very first conversation, then that study, that invite, that relationship will not proceed. Okay. There are over 1 billion people on LinkedIn, and I have never seen so many research studies being advertised through that platform. Is it the right platform? No, because people use it because it's the biggest platform. But to recruit black men for research studies, it's probably the worst platform. But people don't know where the right platform is. So um, be prepared that we are maturing as LXPs. We are getting braver. We're going to challenge you. We're going to ask you difficult questions. So you must be ready for that. Yeah. And also this thing on co-authorship. I was in a meeting last week and one of my lived experience panel colleagues said, "Oh, they said I was a co-author." And he said, "Oh, I was expecting to be writing a paragraph for the research study, but all they ended up doing was just putting my name in their list of recognition name list, whatever that was called." And I've seen the responses in the chat here. I think this co-authorship thing needs to be ironed out because for me, co-authorship is I'm going to be asked to write a lived experience abstract that will be inside that document. That's not just putting my name as a contributor, unless I'm misunderstanding this. Please, somebody enlighten me.
that's a really good point. Thank you, Chris. Does anyone want to pick up on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, I suppose often the way that you write a paper is just kind of through journal guidelines. So sometimes there's like a specific style that it needs to be written in. So I think usually how we've done it, if we've had lived experience advisors as co-authors, is that they're involved from kind of early drafts. so that they can add in. So rather than kind of writing a section of the paper, it would be trying to be involved in the write-up. So the lead author, which at the time was me for one of the papers that I'm thinking of, I would get feedback from really early drafts and try and add in anything that that I would have missed that they would have wanted to include. And that's actually how we would often do it if it was a big team with a paper in general. So there's kind of the lead author that usually takes the lead on it, and others will have several kind of, I guess, chances at input. But there's also people who sometimes are included as authors who have helped with kind of data collection or analysis and actually haven't been involved in the actual write-up much, but have just provided a few bits of feedback and said, yes, I'm happy with the way you've written it. So that's kind of the way that we've done it. I don't know if anybody, would agree with that. But yeah, I think sometimes it kind of depends on the journal. I'm sure there are some where you can maybe be a little bit more creative, but some of them have some very kind of stringent guidelines on how you can do it.
Thanks so much, Georgie. Maybe that's a conversation we can pick up with Chris after, because I think that's, a really good point that we should talk about more. Catherine, I'll go over to you now, and I would love to hear what you think we can improve about lived experience collaborations in the future.
Yeah, I think the question on co-authorship and um as like not really having clarity on that is one of those like kind of bureaucratic academic things that we take for granted. That's been one of the issues that's come up, I think, in the panel is like there's a lot going on in academia that we just assume that people know about. And it's actually not that clear. Like, and also things do change between journals. Like some journals require you to indicate what each co-author has done and things like that. But I think that's part of the problem. And there are like so, and also back to the payment thing, like those kind of like bureaucratic processes that just like happen in universities and in academia, they can be a hurdle. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's down to us as the researchers that are involving lived experience input. It's like down to us to make sure it's super clear and to make sure that we can support people to get through them, I guess. And that's really hard as well. Um, I think another one is this like we need more from the funders. Like, for example, we want to make sure that lived experience people are involved in developing the research from the like conception, which is when you're writing the funding application often. But and then also a lot of funders are say that you need to demonstrate how people with lived experience have contributed to a funding application, but they don't provide funding for you to do that. So you can't necessarily pay people unless you've got other pots of money. So again, this is like another one of those like academic hurdles that feels like we should be able to, it's not that difficult to change, like from the funders and from the university perspectives. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I
maybe
think
I'll let
that's
someone else speak. We've only got a couple minutes.
thanks,
Yeah,
Catherine.
maybe I
And yeah,
can
I think
jump
that's a really good
in.
point. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Okay. All right. So I was just going to echo what everyone is saying, but to just say that, participation needs to be meaningful. So even as we are doing the publication manuscripts and thinking about authorship, they should be meaningful participation. And that then calls for capacity building. When we expect our lived experience experts to contribute to a manuscript, then we need to provide the capacity to do that. So in our thinking with the budgets and everything, we need to include that so that we don't then get to a place where we're not able to pay people or we're not able to do certain things because we didn't think about it when we're coming up with budgets.
Thanks, Terry. And yeah, I think that really echoes what Catherine was saying about we need to find ways to involve lived experience in the funding applications, because I'm sure these applications would probably look a lot different if we had this input from the start and co-developed them, it would probably be a lot better. Okay, so we'll go over to Jane now. I'd love to hear what you think about how we can improve things in the future and looking forward. And I know we put a question in the chat, but maybe we'll see if we get time for that after.
I think, yeah, like what was spoken about regarding capacity building and community engagement. I think community engagement especially, because an example I would use that I think is really great to kind of practice across the board would be going into communities, actively going into communities and putting up structures that can still exist after the researchers are gone. So, for example, there was a time when we went into one of the communities, and it was Hadcliffe, I think. And yes, and we spoke to the young people there, and they did say that they would want to continue coming together and meeting up and having these discussions, whilst even when we are gone, even when we're not a part of this anymore. And I think that is part of the capacity building, actually, is where we go into these communities, we educate each other, as young people, and us as I would say, maybe as the leaders of the programs, we go into these communities, we train these young people, and then we leave them with the capacity to continue these programs even after we've left, because it then removes that power dynamic and the reliance element as well. And then it also empowers them. So I think that's also a really good approach to take when considering how to move forward with research. Because I think one thing that I have felt bad about is you just go into these communities, you take information from them, and then you just kind of leave them. But the conversation needs to be an ongoing conversation, because it's not just about grabbing information, writing papers, and then we just share them amongst the professionals, because it's only going to be the other psychologists reading them, the other social workers reading them. But then this is for the layman, right? Because these are issues that are affecting us, the people, the community. So yeah, so I think community engagement and capacity building, that's a really big element of it.
Thanks, Jane. And I think that's a really beautiful note to end this theme on. How can we create lasting impact beyond just the research study that we're doing? If we genuinely care about involvement and participation, how can we make things better for the future after we're gone? So yeah, I really love that perspective. So yeah, I think we've run out of time now. Completely agree with you, Chris. We should have done this for a lot longer. But I will just say for all the people left, we will upload the recording, the resources, everything to the Sci-Translate portal. It's free to sign up, and you'll have access to this session as well as all of our past sessions. We hold a meeting every month, and we also have some information in the Slack channel. So yeah, we'll keep sharing some of the insights from this talk. And thank you so much again for everyone who joined, and especially to all the speakers that were here today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's been a fantastic session.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Anna.
David.
Bye.
Good to see you, Anna.
Thanks.
Georgie,
You
see you
too.
soon.